Let's talk about some other NBA draft prospects. We're going to Tre Johnson. Yes, we're going to Rasheer Fleming. We're having a look at VJ Edgecombe with some differing opinions. And we're hearing from Michael Bolton. I think if the button would work, we would be hearing from Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and unfortunately for you, there's not enough ratings on this show for anyone to enjoy it. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms. Like I said, we are doing a draft scout video. Tre Johnson, VJ Edgecombe, Liam McNeeley, Rasheer Fleming, Ben Saraf, covering all those guys with Leif Thulin from the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. So we might as well bring Leif in. I'm going to do a mock draft after this show, but it will come out probably tomorrow, so be ready for that. Let's get Leif in. All right, let's bring him in. Here he is. Leif Thulin back on the show to talk about some NBA draft prospects. Leif, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
It's good to have you here, man, and we're going to talk about some of these prospects, like I said, but we're just going to start off with a guy we talked about last week in VJ Edgecombe from Baylor, because he's a guy that, when I ask all these guys that are coming on, as someone that you're not quite as high on maybe is where the consensus sits. The name that you brought up was VJ Edgecombe, so we'll talk about VJ Edgecombe right now. What are you doubting with him? Because he seems to be a pretty consensus top 4 prospect. You're a little bit lower on him than that.
Yeah, I have him 5 or 6, so not horribly low, but I do feel like there's a divide between he and what I perceive to be the top 4 of Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, Tre Johnson, Ace Bailey. Like those 4, I think, are better prospects than VJ Edgecombe by a decent margin. Edgecombe, he was inconsistent to start the season, to say the least. In fact, he was consistently a chameleon, meaning he blended in games against inferior opponents, both athletically and in terms of record. So that was not ideal. And then you look at what he did throughout the season. He had games where he was able to slash and get to the free throw line, which is good, but he didn't really develop any handle, do things like that. And so when you put it into the scheme of how well play on a team, I like when I'm drafting in the top 5 to get a guy I think can be an all-star, maybe even better than that, because I wanted to have a franchise-changing talent. And I don't see him doing so because I've never seen him put the ball on the deck and create for himself. He usually attacks off of actions that are designed for him to get downhill. It's like premeditated of what's happening. He did start shooting better, and as that got better, that perpetuated him up into a new level of the stock. But I don't feel that strongly that he can ever be a lead scorer on a team, and the other guys I do believe can be.
Yeah, I can say that. Like, I've sort of gone back and forward on him over the last week or so talking about, because I go, the defensive stuff is good, that two-way ability is interesting, and maybe he can do these other things, and I go, but maybe he can't, and maybe he just turns into a defense-only two-guard who doesn't really have that level of upside that you're probably looking for if you're taking someone in the top 4, and I reckon about 4 days ago I had him, maybe could I put him at number 3? They went, no, let's put him down at 5. And I'm sort of, that whole area is a little bit of a mess for me in that area. In terms of the shooting, I think there's probably some questions there. Like, wasn't great, like he wasn't terrible, 34% from 3 and 76% from the line. The 2-point numbers aren't ideal either. Is this a thing that's going to be a persistent problem for him? And do you think that's going to be something that keeps that usage lower, reducing that ceiling?
I actually think his shot got significantly better throughout the year, which is strange because typically as competition gets better, the shooting percentage drops. But I thought he got better throughout the season as a shooter. I think he's kind of an athlete learning to shoot as opposed to a natural shooter. So I don't think he's going to be a great shooter, but I don't think that's an issue. You did mention that the defense being an appeal. I challenge that he's not that great of a defender. Like a lot of people assume he is because he's a good athlete, but you watch him play and he doesn't take the role of being a defensive stopper whatsoever. He doesn't guard multiple positions that well because he's not that big. So I think that's just projection as opposed to stuff that actually happened. And maybe he does get better in that regard. And people are raving, oh, he's 6'4". Like 6'4" for a 2 guard is not that big. So I think there's a lot of people taking his athleticism to mean this is a certainty. And I don't think that though that is a certainty, and nor do I think he'll be this dynamic slasher as a certainty either, because it's just hard to be that good in the NBA and have the usage rate that would dictate that.
I think you're right about the defensive stuff. I think I misspoke a little bit there because I was more referring to the level of defensive stats and the steals that he generated, which we've seen plenty of players do in college, and that doesn't mean they're good defenders. But what it has generally meant, Leif, is players get high steal rates, is there's an innate feel for improvements in other areas. There have been plenty of players who were turned into offense-only guys in the NBA who had really high steal rates and were considered, defensive turnover, defensive playmaker sort of players in college. So I think the steal rate is a good thing for him. But you're right in terms of he's not Alex Caruso. He's not out there locking guys down. He's not coming in even with Marcus Smart level defense or anything like that. But the steal rate is intriguing to me. So every time I go to knock him down, I go, I don't know about the size. I don't know about the shooting. I don't know about the passing. I don't know about all this sort of stuff. I go, yeah, but steal rate is a pretty interesting number that can just generally you look at feel for a player coming into the league. Now, when I last talked about him, I've talked about some of the other poor shot selection guards that have come out of Baylor the last couple of years. How do you view him versus those guys, Walter and George?
Well, Keontae George, I think, got a weird role at Baylor in the sense that he was playing the 3 next to 2 diminutive guards, and he's played the point guard for the majority of his NBA career, which, you don't see that dichotomy too frequently between 2 positions. And I think his efficiency suffered there. I do think VJ is a far more dynamic athlete than both Jacoby Walter and Keontae George. And though I've been skeptical of the athleticism translating into certain stardom, I do think that leads for a floor that's fairly high. I just question the ceiling in the sense that, typically if you're going top 5, that means you can score 20 a game. Or you have some other trait that makes you undeniable, and I just don't see that necessarily. But I do think he's a better prospect than both the prior 2 Baylor guards.
I'm going to bring this back, the last thing on Edgecombe, to talk about some prior prospects as well, because it's very easy to compare the 2025 draft to the 2024 draft in the lack of quality, so to speak, in the draft we had last year. How would you compare VJ Edgecombe to Stephon Castle, who won Rookie of the Year last year?
I had Stephon Castle number 1 on my board last year, so I'd take Stephon Castle easily.
Very, very interesting. That is why we wanted to have you on, Leif, to provide the differing opinion here on VJ Edgecombe, because I wouldn't, but again, who knows how this stuff is going to work out. So that's an interesting way to go about that. We're going to talk about one of the guys you do have in the top 4, another player who I've flip-flopped a million times over the last 3 or 4 days, and people are going to see overall where I have him in the next day or 2 when I do put out my second mock draft. And we are going to come back and talk about Tre Johnson from Texas. Before I do that, today's episode, though, is brought to you by... That's not who it's brought to you by, but, shout out to FanDuel anyway, because they're good partners of the show. Today's episode is actually brought to you by DoorDash. And with the NBA playoffs on, the playoff season, it means there are big performances and there are bigger rewards, and DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It is called, amazingly, They Swoosh and You Score. Anytime that a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. You just place an order of $20 or more, use the code WINGSTOP50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. And the offer is valid from noon until midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Leif, Wingstop, we don't have it here in Australia. Is it good? How good is it? How exciting is a 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop? Well, I'm going to be getting some Wingstop when I head across to the States in a couple of months. Maybe the playoffs won't be on, so I won't be able to get the deal, but you can get the deal. So all you got to do is sign up to Dash Pass, unlock this, and you get more exclusive deals all season long. So when any player scores 50 or more in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 order and code WINGSTOP50. That's Dash Pass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms, of course, as always, terms apply. All right, we're back, of course, with Leif Thulin here talking about the NBA draft, and we are going to go with a guy now. Oh, that's the wrong. Geez, I'm having a real button-pushing incorrect day here, Leif. I'm just getting the wrong notes all the time, but that's okay. We're here to talk about a guy that you think might be getting a little bit underrated, which, again, is a term which is a a tougher one to sort of not swallow, but it's just a blanket term that I've got there because he's going to go in the top 5 or top 6. But Tre Johnson, guard out of Texas, and it's very easy to compare and contrast him and VJ Edgecombe because they play similar positions. They're going to go in the similar range in the draft. So when you say that you're a little bit higher on Tre, I'm going to guess that you said he was in the top 4. I'm going to guess you got him at 3.
I do have Tre at 3 right now. I recently have promoted him from 3. I've been toying with it for a while, but I think Tre Johnson, of players that will go in the first round, is the best shooter. I think the only shooter better than him in the entire draft is named Kobe Brea, and he's a 22-year-old senior from Kentucky, played at Dayton the year prior and shot 49% from 3 there. And Tre Johnson, to me, is the best shooter outside of Kobe Brea, and he brings to the table more than just shooting. He's able to play as the point guard. He's able to play as a 2 guard. He had terrible spacing around him, led the SEC in scoring as a freshman, and that's an SEC that had 14 bids to the NCAA tournament. He was able to instigate all of the actions that happened for Texas, and whenever he played off the ball, he made the shot. So I think you can either put him in a role that is reminiscent to that of Bradley Beal, coming off screens, pin downs, knockdown shots, has some individual creation there. But also, here's a pitch that I've said a few times. It's not a one-to-one comparison. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, if I asked you his position, you'd probably have told me 2 guard, right? Mm-hmm. Until he's now playing the 1 because he's such an offensive force, you might as well just put the ball in that guy's hands. So that's what I see in the sense of Tre Johnson. I think he's such an offensive talent that there's a world where you just put the ball in his hands and let his offensive talent create for you, and you refine some of those playmaking instincts that are not bad, but definitely need refining. I think that there's better playmaking instincts that he possesses than that of VJ by a mile, but I also think they're better than what he was able to display at Texas because there's going to be spacing, which allows for more passing as well as more downhill creation as opposed to kind of the step backs that you see as the highlight reel, but also as inefficient shots that he took at Texas.
There's a really different way that things are being judged in the NBA of late. Like a lot of us still have this idea of like we need a point guard and he's going to be this high assist player, and people like I'll always use this guy's name as this example. People lose their mind that Tyus Jones only got a minimum deal because you look at this elite point guard numbers. Like yeah, but nothing there is exciting. He doesn't provide any fear to defenses. He doesn't open anything up. The guys who are the point guards, so to speak, are Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like Anthony Edwards is not the Timberwolves point guard, but let's be honest, he runs everything. Like that's what a point guard does. He doesn't get the big assist numbers. He's not a flashy passer. He's not opening things up and creating cracks in defenses for his team, but he's realistically the point guard. So if you're drafting someone in the top 5 who's not a point guard, you still want them to be the number 1 guy that's having the ball and dictating the flow of how things work. So I think we've got to sort of change it. We could look at Yegor Demon, or we could look at Yaki Chonas and go, well, they're point guards and they've got this passing ability, but it's a different sort of thing. It's point guard, I guess, Leif versus lead guard, and I believe a lead guard is the most important sort of guy that you need on a team. Yes, having a point guard, that traditional sort of setup player to calm things down can be important, but when you're going for the fences, the lead guard type, which I think where Tre fits, is probably the better way to describe him.
I agree completely. I think the lead guard and the kind of like big, I wouldn't say facilitator, but initiator in the like of Jason Tatum, who, he's not the point guard of the Celtics either, but he's the type of guy who, when healthy, obviously he just got injured, he's the type who can handle the offensive workload of playing as an initiator and then defensively can switch. And that's what makes him so valuable. In the case of someone of Tre Johnson's build, you're not going to be able to have that versatility defensively, but you can be the star of the team scoring the ball and bring that attention and make the right reads. Like I would argue Anthony Edwards, even though he was criticized for not scoring very well in the last series against the Thunder, against tremendous defense, he made a lot of right reads. And even if they don't turn into assists, maybe they're hockey assists. And so I think Tre Johnson is not quite at that same ilk of superstar necessarily of Shai, but the reason I compared the two is that's the possibility I see from him that I have no possibility of seeing for VJ Edgecombe, as I don't see him being a lead guard who creates. And maybe I'll be wrong, but I think Tre Johnson's got far more of that capacity that he's already demonstrated and a lot of room to grow because of situation and spacing.
Last question on Tre. Okay, you've got him at 3. I don't want to quite spoil exactly where I've got him, but let's just say it's above 4. And that's great because he's a very good player. Now, that archetype is really interesting. the Philadelphia Sixers pick at number 3, and they have Tyrese Maxey, and they just drafted Jared McCain. I'm not saying you shouldn't draft over Jared McCain or anything like that, but how does Tre Johnson make sense in that? I'm not having someone at 3 on your board doesn't mean they go at 3 in a mock draft. I think we all know that, but how would he be able to be a player that could work alongside Tyrese Maxey, or are the some of the limitations, I guess, with Tre maybe making that less appealing?
So I actually had this exact discussion with Raphael and James Barlow. And we talked about this, and though James and I both have Tre at number 3, we each believe that Ace Bailey is the better pick for the 76ers because there's a plethora of reasons. But keeping it on Tre Johnson as opposed to switching to the Ace Bailey, Tre Johnson, Jared McCain, and Tyrese Maxey are all relatively diminutive for the position that they would be playing in terms of stature, but also height. And yes, you don't necessarily need ball handling. So if you're the 76ers, the appeal of Tre over Ace is largely ball handling and more refined, more polished as a player at this point. And I'd argue a better scorer. So that's the appeal, right? And that's great. However, you're not going to get there at the same level on the 76ers because Maxey's going to have the ball and Embiid's going to have the ball. So the necessity is more for height and versatility defensively on the 76ers, especially considering they're a win now team, as opposed to many of these teams that are drafting in the top 10 being teams that have patience and will develop. And so though they would like shooting, it's not like Ace Bailey lacks for shooting. I have him a top 5 shooter in this class that will be drafted in the first round. But Tre Johnson's a better shooter, but he's not as big. And I also think in the unique case of the 76ers, there's no better mentor in the NBA for Ace Bailey than the possibility of learning under Paul George and also playing alongside him.
Yeah, Paul George, every young player's greatest player of all time, especially ones who are that size. Let's talk about another player who's not going to go in the top 5. He's probably going to be a first-round player, or maybe not. We're going to go to Connecticut. I'm going to talk about Liam McNeeley, who is, from the surface, you look at him, you go, okay, here we go. White guy, shooter, I guess, but the numbers shooting 38% from the field and 32% from 3 might suggest that there's a little bit to work on there. So what is the appeal of Liam McNeeley? Like, what sort of a player is he? That stereotypical guy the shots just didn't fall? Like, what can he bring that's a little bit different to that?
I actually really like Liam McNeeley. McNeeley is someone who brings the stereotypical, hey, I think he makes the right play, he plays hard, he gets rebounds, like all the stuff that you'd say about a set player that has the kind of the polish that a guy who went to Montverde then UConn should have. Then I would also give the context at UConn, he was not supposed to be the star player, but it was turned into being a guy who carried an enormous workload. And so his 31.7% from 3 is, I think, contextually inaccurate. Or it's obviously accurate, but it contextually misleads you because you'd say, oh, well, that's not very good for spot-up shots. But he was the one with the ball in his hands operating out of pick and rolls. And in that very complicated UConn system, he perpetuated himself up to number 1 option because Alex Karaban could not do so. And the point guard play was poor, and Hassan Diarra taking over for what was a very big strength in Tristan Newton, who is the first-team All-American and most outstanding player in the national championship game. Like that, there was a lot that he had to do, and he showcased he could do a lot. And even if the usage rate was high and the percentages were a bit low, I think context matters, and so his shooting percentage would actually get better. And I'm pretty confident that you slot him on an NBA team that says, hey, guard as hard as you can, rebound the ball, put your nose in there, play hard, and hit open shots. I think he'll succeed in that. And I have him as a 14th overall on my board. And I keep seeing people drop him lower and lower because they reference shooting. And as they're like, oh, he's supposed to be a shooter, but he's not that good a shooter. I'd urge them to watch UConn play and see the workload that he took upon himself as a true freshman.
Yeah, that's context is always important with every one of these players, and like he shot an elite number, pretty close to elite from the free throw line, which is important. The volume of 3-point shots was pretty solid. He still hit 2 threes a game. He was 87% from the free throw line, and all those things are pretty strong indicators or important things to take a look at when you're trying to evaluate a player's shooting, as well as form, mechanics, context and when the shots are happening, spot ups, catch and shoots, off the dribble, all that sort of stuff, late shot clock, all that sort of stuff is important in assessing all of these numbers. And I think that is right. Like, I originally had McNeeley up, around that same mark that you did, and you've moved him back a little bit, but not massively, because again, there is value in that sort of a player, or pretty strong value in that sort of a player, if it does work out. And we've seen a lot of the opposite as well, Leif, because we can talk about, well, he didn't shoot, he's a shooter, but these guys who come in previous years and we talk about, oh, he's the best shooter in the class, like, well, let's just put Grady Dick out there, right? Okay, hasn't shown that at all in the NBA so far. Even like a guy who's playing some unbelievable basketball in the conference finals now. These are names that I've referenced in these shows a lot. Aaron Nesmith shot like 45% from three coming out of college, and now, he's not shooting terribly. He's still a solid shooter, but no one would say he's the best shooter in the league or the best shooter on his team, but he's working as a hard-nosed defender. Like, there's context about all of these things, and even if you come in as a bad shooter, even though the context is wrong, you can get better, or if you come in as the best shooter, it doesn't mean that's going to be the thing that you're able to hang your hat on, because there are just so many different factors that go into all those types of areas and developmental processes. We've got two more guys that we are going to come back and talk about. We're including another forward, a little bit of an older forward for this one. I'm excited to talk about Rasheer Fleming, who's the guy we're going to get into right now, Leif, because, again, some of the numbers on him pop. There's just a few, question marks, I guess, would be the best way of phrasing it with Rasheer, who's almost 21. He played at St. Joe's. A big man. There's quite a few big men sort of in this middle area of the draft in terms of a off the top of my head, why am I blanking? Asa Newell around that area as well. Those power forward type players. Is Fleming strictly a four? Does he play the three at all? Can he play up small ball? Like, where are you seeing his positional value in the NBA?
I think he's largely a four. I think there is a world he can play the three. You just need someone who can really shoot the ball at the four next to him. He does shoot well from three, according to the numbers. And you watch the game. It's not like they're just dare shots, but he's not necessarily a shooter by like, oh, let's get out on him, fly out and shoot. I think he's an athlete turned into a shooter. He actually reminds me quite a bit in the way that I evaluated Taylor Hendricks. Taylor Hendricks was a defensively touted prospect, and everyone said, well, the reason we're going to fall in love is because he shot 39%. Well, I watched Taylor Hendricks up close and personal, and when he came into the NBA, he's gotten better since, and of course, unfortunately got injured, but he was shooting it very flat, and it was kind of a forced shot, and teams were leaving him open. And then in the final month of his rookie season, he made a tremendous leap. However, that was with the context of teams leaving him open. So I'm not the biggest believer in Fleming's three. His defensive traits and size and stuff like that, I'm imagining, is why you're intrigued, because I'm sure his steal percentages, block percentages, rebound percentage are all off the charts. I haven't looked at all those, but I know all the numbers in terms of the
pretty
raw
high
numbers. So I'd imagine that that's the appeal that teams are going to see. But how many players of that ilk turn into good shooters and can make themselves more valuable than more than one position? So I have some reservation, but he is a project worth looking at, because you don't see too many guys with his unique qualifications, size, length, wingspan, stuff like that. And typically those in that group succeed. Like, you look at Tari Eason as one of the more recent ones. And even though you'd say, oh, like Tari has some drawbacks, that's a guy who played big minutes on a good playoff team. And you look at, some of the other guys that you say, oh, that guy didn't do as well. Like Patrick Williams went number 4 because of that same stuff. He's still a good basketball player. It's just not the expectation of going number 4. So the fact that you could get this guy like 20 or something is a positive.
I love that you brought up Taylor Hendricks, because that's a name that I reference a lot when talking about player profiles like this guy that in the past I've been so super high on. Noah Clowney, one of those sort of players with that, can he protect the rim, and can he switch out, and he can rebound, and he can play small ball center, and then he can shoot. And even like a Tyler Smith from last season, it's like, okay, no one's good in this class, but this guy can shoot, and maybe he blocks shots. Let's see where all this goes. And then there's a few of those guys in this draft class where I'm just going, okay, those guys haven't really worked. I believe in Hendricks still quite a bit, but they haven't quite worked to that level, so I'm pulling back a little bit on my evaluation of these players. But everything is there again for him. Good efficiency, good three-point shooting, good three-point volume, great rebounds, great steals, great blocks. I will pose this part to you about Fleming. Playing for St. Joe's, how does that impact the way that you look at the numbers? He's not playing in the SEC. Is he doing that on a team where he is already 21, on a team that's in not as strong of a conference? Like, how does that impact the way you look at that whole sort of statistical line and all the different things he needed to do?
So there's two ways I like to look at this, and because I watch a ton of college basketball live as opposed to going back and watching these players in clips, which is a very different evaluation method. I love to watch full games and during the season so I don't have these narratives surround me. When I watched him play, I thought to myself during the different games, okay, activity. He is a star on this team, but the role I foresee for him is a role player. That happens fairly frequently. Yep. However, a lot of the best role players who have done very well in that regard have been guys who have been role players on their team. So let me give an example. Mikal Bridges. Yep. Mikal Bridges was excellent in college, and he played on an excellent team, a team that won a championship easily and didn't get challenged whatsoever. But the reason I bring that up is Mikal Bridges is the best archetype of 3-and-D that we've got in the NBA right now, more or less. And he was that at Villanova. So how often does a guy who plays an enormous role in his usage rate, like you have on the screen, so it makes it easier for me rather than relying on memory, is 21.3% here. And so that was a high usage rate for a guy that I think factors in to shoot infrequently in the NBA from deep. Like he'll shoot some, but infrequently, and his role will be defense. But how often does a guy who's 6'9", that's an okay shooter in the NBA, which is what I project him to be, play the 3? Because if he's at the 4, his rebounding rate is good, but that's where the athleticism of playing in the A-10 matters a lot more than playing in the SEC, and that's where I have some drawback. Whereas, like, when people say, oh, that's a lottery guy, look at all those things that he does well, look at the counting stats and the usage rate and the steal rate and all that stuff, I give a little pause because that's where athleticism matters the most, and that's where he's a differentiator athletically because, yeah, he's got those great traits, but he's playing guys that are not the same atmosphere defensively and athletically. So I do give a little bit pause there, and that's why I typically like players that are stars on both ends of the floor at their mid-majors. And I know he put up numbers, but their offensive number one option was not him.
Yeah, that's that thing with that guy. And that's probably why I'm not sour on him, but because immediately I look at the numbers and I look at the numbers where I translate them across to fantasy stats, and there's only one player that translates their college stats better. Oh, sorry, that's not true. There's two players who translate better than Rasheer Fleming. Number one is Cooper Flagg. Number two is Johnny Broome. But we're going to have context in all that. So, like, if Fleming was just to drop those numbers in that context into an NBA team, like, he'd be putting up unbelievable fantasy value. But again, I have been not necessarily fooled, but like maybe over enamored by that sort of player in the past. And then I've got to be also cautious of this Leaf of not going too far in the other direction to make sure that I'm not over indexing my love for that sort of prospect. The last guy we're going to talk about is another prospect that we've seen quite a bit of lately. So a taller, poor shooting, European combo point passing, however you want to phrase it. It's Ben Saraf, who played over with Rasheer Fleming alongside Noah Essengay. Was there any other draft prospects on the team? Because that team has a ton of draft prospects, and they do give them pretty big leash to run things. Who else was on that team? Or was it just Essengay?
Well, those two are the most fun to watch at the very least. And when you talk about Saraf as a poor shooter, this is one that I think, like, you watch him play, and I start to believe, and I could very well be wrong because, you got to make shots. But his shot appears soft. And some of those guys that have enormous usage rates in professional leagues, and like you just saw it, 27.6 is an enormous usage rate in a professional league. The fact that that usage rate is so high leads me to believe that there's capacity to score, because many of these guys, if they're not capable scorers, they tend to just like, hey, like, I'm shooting the shot, and like the shot we're going to take is going to be a layup. And if they go under me, then we're going to hide from it. He at least leads me to believe he can initiate the offense and he can shoot the ball as a reactive piece. Like, it's not necessarily he's going to look for it first thing, but like if he's told by the game to take a deep three, he can do so. And I think if you look at Nikola Topic in years past, that was something he could not do. I'm not saying he's a better prospect than Topic because I think Topic was bigger and a little bit better a passer, but I would push back a little bit. I think there is shooting potential for Saraf. The
Topic 20 is interesting. So he was one of the names that I immediately drew myself towards to go, can he shoot? What's he doing offensively? That's not passing. Like, does that all work? Because, again, we haven't seen Topic play. These guys are going to be presumably playing their rookie years at the same time. And that is that sort of interesting player. That usage is an unbelievably high number for how old is he? 19-year-old playing over in Europe. But again, context is always important, Leif, because the way that Rasheer Fleming uses their guys is they like, no, we're fine. We're going to actually run this as a not development, but we're going to lean into these higher level prospects and give them the minutes versus they play 12 minutes a night in the Euro League and we don't get to see anything from them. So like that is huge. That's a big number. But if he was positioned at a different team, there's almost zero chance he'd be running. He's not like that. Like, wow, everyone's got to be all about Ben Saraf and we're going to give him this usage on any team. It's very a team specific sort of bump in numbers there.
I agree, and you would see the same thing with Asenge too.
Yeah,
Asenge, most of those guys that I would describe as baby giraffe-ish, like Tre Johnson, someone last year that many people became enamored with because their body's super long and there's room to grow. Well, they don't have the productivity because of this usage rate that Ratio Farm allows. I was pretty skeptical of Asenge just to begin with. Then I started watching. I was like, man, he gets the line a lot. And I looked up the numbers. He gets the free throw line more than Julius Randle did at Kentucky. And if those of you who watch a lot of college hoops or just are draft bound, Julius Randle is a bruiser who'd get to the line at will. And that's something that I believe in. So I actually am high on both of these guys, Saraf and Asenge.
Asenge, again, there's the PTSD feelings that I have of, not that I was super high on Salam, but it was like you hear so many of the same sort of things. Oh, he's a French guy, 6'9", 6'10", and look at the upside, and maybe he's going to be a good defender, and maybe the shot's going to come along, and then you see the numbers for a guy like Asenge, and you go, okay, yep, I hope it's not that guy, but you're right. That free throw attempt rate for him is really interesting, and there's a lot of stuff here with Saraf that is really quite intriguing. I don't love the free throw percentage indicator in terms of long-term 3-point shooting at 73%, but it would suggest to me that I don't think he's going to be a sub 30% player. What about defensively? Is he turnstile? Is he going to be able to lock in on that end? Like, where is Saraf's defensive potential?
I would tell you that I don't think he'll ever be a good defender, but I think with size and kind of the intangibles that are taught to you by playing at a young age in a professional league, he'll be adequate. And, maybe it's below average, but if his offensive capacities grow because of those intangibles grow on that end, I think he'll have a way to be competent, and he's got enough size to perhaps rebound the ball. And I know that's not defense necessarily, but I'm a believer that some guys just are not meant to be as good of defenders as others, right? Like, you want to maximize your ability, and one way to do so, if you're not like laterally exceptionally quick, is put your nose in there and rebound. And I think he's got that capacity at the very least, and perhaps a little bit more than being a turnstile. But I won't lie to you and tell you I think he'll be a good defender because, he's okay in Europe. That's not something I believe in.
Well, that is a really interesting set of players that we talked about, Leif. Some great opinions and breakdowns of their games, and it's always great to have you on to talk about all of those guys. What's happening for you at the moment over with Locked On NBA Big Board? Is David having some breaks? You're taking on Locked On Jazz at the moment. Like, what's happening for you at the moment?
I'm on Locked On NBA Big Board. We just did an episode. If you want to hear more about Tre Johnson and Ace Bailey and that 76ers pick, James, Raphael, and I all shared our opinions, where we have on the board, why we take who. It's a very, very interesting episode, one of the more fun ones we've done in a while. So I'm on Big Board. I will be on Locked On Jazz for the first couple weeks of June. And right now, at the time being, I am the step-in host for the Locked On Wizards. So a lot of draft coverage for teams that are in similar ranges, as well as just draft coverage in general. And if you guys want to engage with me, my Twitter's on that screen, just my name. It's always a pleasure being on here with you, and happy to do it anytime. But it's always a fascinating one because we get to dive into the analytics while I can still spout off about my eye test being important. But I do like stats, considering I do stats for the Jazz. So I always enjoy this segment.
Awesome, Leif. It's great to talk to you again, and go check out Leif on all of those individual podcasts that he is hosting. Thanks again, man.
Of course.
All right, some really good food for thought there, I think, with a lot of those prospects that me and Leif talked about. And I think that's nearly everybody out of the top, let's say 15 to 20 guys that we've spoken about. I'm just going to double check that to see which players we haven't done prospect scouts on yet. I know there is someone. Oh, we haven't done Yegor Demin yet. Who else have we not been able to? Oh, we haven't done Kaman Maluach. Who else? I know there's someone else that we haven't done at that top level yet. I'll get back to you on that. One sec. Oh, the other one is Thomas Sorba that we haven't gotten to yet, who we will get there. Nolan Traore is another name there. So we're getting through these prospects. We've got more of them coming up, but the next mock draft will come out. I'll probably record it straight after this, and then we'll come out tomorrow. So stay tuned, stay around, subscribe so you don't miss out on that one. We'll go the first 30 picks in that one as well. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.